Hello and welcome back to the Stubborn Book Podcast. This is Bernadette. This is going to be our third episode in an 8-part series of the book Stubborn by Andy Caygeon Junkin. This time it is Chapter 1, and Chapter 1 revolves around the story of a young woman who complains about how she is unfairly treated by her family and within the family business. Chauvinism is pretty rampant on this farm. When we were able to get a few mindset shifts and some practical habits put in place, her farm's culture was transformed. And so here you go. This is Chapter 1, Head. Stop butting heads with each other. Let's have a listen right now. Chapter 1, Head. Stop butting heads with each other.
Katie was frustrated. She had put a lot of research into calf barn ventilation and had gotten 3 quotes from 3 different suppliers. The farm had double the number of calves getting sick due to poor ventilation in its calf barns. Throughout the year, she had worked with the vet to tweak everything she could in the barn to reduce the number of calves getting pneumonia, but without fixing the root problem, which was the poor ventilation system, they'd continue to have problems next year. She did the math, and the $30,000 investment into a new ventilation system would pay for itself within 2 years by reducing the calf sickness rate by half. By fewer calves getting sick, it would not only be more humane, but more profitable. Being an agriculture college graduate, she had put in the time to write a 1-page report and have a financial analysis to prove her assumptions, and backed it up with 3 different quotes from different suppliers. She gave this report to her dad in the milk house after they were just finishing up chores and going for breakfast. At that moment, her brother showed up to the barn a half hour late for chores, yet again, and it was obvious that her dad was pissed at her brother, but he didn't say anything. Her dad took the report, folded it up, and stuck it in his back pocket, focusing on going back to what he was doing. A couple of days later, she asked her dad what he thought of her suggestions, and he said, "We have no money for that. Maybe next year." It was December, and Katie knew that the farm had an exceptional year with high milk prices. Plus, milk production was 10% higher since she had taken over herd management 2 years prior. She knew that the farm was going to have profits at the end of the year and would likely reinvest money somewhere before the year's end to avoid paying more taxes. Later that morning, a brand new $600,000 combine showed up in the yard. Katie was astounded. She knew nothing about that purchase. She complained to her dad, but all he said was, "Well, I'm trying to get your brother to give a damn about this farm. And he said that he wanted a new combine, so we got him one." At that moment, her brother's truck drove up to the yard, this time an hour late, to do farm chores. Of course, he was ecstatic to see the new purchase. All the men in the family were really, her dad, her Uncle Bob, and her brother were like kids on Christmas morning getting a new toy. The farm already had a combine with less than 1,000 hours on it, and the farm could have easily gone another 5 years before replacing the one they had. She was irate that decisions were being made were based on emotion and people-pleasing rather than cash flow. She called me up and complained. She told me that if she were a boy, her concerns would have actually been heard. She was frustrated because any time her brother said he wanted something, he got it. What he wanted seemed to matter more, just because he was a male. I didn't disagree with Katie. It was probably true. I said to her, "From what you told me about your dad, it sounds like he doesn't even realize he's being chauvinistic. 5,000 years of paradigms are hard to change within a generation, and you're going to be facing this challenge in working with him all your life. But this is only a fraction of your problem. The first problem is your biggest one. Your dad thinks of the farm as his, not ours. You have put in as many hours into the business over the past year as he has, but he still looks at you as his helper or employee, not a partner. Decisions are being made without you being involved because you are merely a helper. You've increased milk production significantly and done chores twice a day, every day this past year, without taking a single holiday except one weekend for your cousin's wedding. You have been making personal sacrifices to make this business successful to the point that the farm will have extra profit at the end of the year, yet your opinion doesn't matter. A my farm to our farm mindset shift needs to happen. The second thing is that your dad doesn't look at business decisions as rational investments, but instead as giving gifts to his kids. Too many decisions are emotionally based. He was trying to motivate your brother by giving him a fancy toy to get him more interested in the farm, rather than an objective investment in what would make the farm more money. Putting in new calf barn ventilation does nothing to build his ego. However, driving a new combine is a status symbol that impresses the neighbors and makes him feel good about himself. Your challenge is to eliminate the egos and emotions from decision-making on your farm and instead make decisions based on what is good for the farm and family in the long term, not making excuses to just do what feels good today. The third thing is that your dad, Tom, built that calf barn. He was really proud of that barn when he first built it, and for you to say that it isn't good enough is probably an insult to him. I am certain that back when he built that calf barn, he did the best he could with the technology and budget the farm had at the time. But over the last 23 years, ventilation systems have evolved and there are other options. You must help him look at your suggestion as an improvement to the efficiency of the farm, not an insult to what he's done in the past. Whether he consciously recognizes this or not, he might resent you criticizing his design decisions from when he built that barn 23 years ago. Katie listened quietly as I explained her challenges. I repeated myself. Your number one challenge is getting all the partners to see the farm as our farm instead of Dad's farm. This would eliminate so much of the BS you're experiencing, including your brother's immature actions. The reason why your brother is showing up late to work and acting like an employee is that he is thinking of himself as an employee, not an owner. Truthfully, he has a slave's mindset, not an owner's mindset, and that is a huge problem. If you want your brother to pull his weight and act like a partner, he's got to start thinking like a partner and being treated like one. But how do I do that? Katie sounded exasperated. For crying out loud, the farm is called Tom Van Boer's Farm. I brought up changing the farm's name to Van Boer Family Farm last month, and Dad blew up at me. I quickly told Katie a story to illustrate. When I was a young man, I was a Boy Scout. My Boy Scout leader took a bunch of us out to the woods and told us to go light a fire. Me and an 8-year-old friend dragged a big old log out of the swamp and tried to light it on fire. My Boy Scout leader watched us for about 15 minutes and laughed, while the other much older boys were successful in lighting their fires. Then after we were frustrated, he stepped in and showed us the proper way to build a fire. He said, "Boys, you need to start with the small, dry kindling first, and then add bigger and bigger sticks to the fire as the fire can handle it." So it is with family decision-making. Fighting over succession planning, the company's name, wanting to spend $1 million for a business expansion, or even just $30,000 like in your case, is as foolish as trying to start a big wet log from the swamp. You need to get your farm's multiple generations and multiple siblings making decisions together on small issues prior to making the big ones. You need to learn to listen to each other and be able to problem solve and arrive at simple decisions together without emotion before you solve the complex ones. But where do I start? Katie said. How in the heck can you get everyone agreeing with each other, let alone listening to a girl? As a mediator, I used to sit families down for a family business meeting to discuss strategic matters, and it would be like trying to get a big old wet log lit. Now I focus on the question, what is your family doing tomorrow with their time? I told Katie, I'd suggest that you get your family to adapt the mantra, invest time like it's money, and learn to make decisions together as a team as to how to best invest your time. These decisions are simple with usually no emotions attached. Katie's ears perked up, and I could hear her voice change to a more optimistic tone. Farm families often bicker about where and how to invest their financial resources, what tractor or seed to buy. But the most valuable resource for every business is the use of the owner's time. If I can get you, Tom, Uncle Bob, and your brother to have a conversation on Monday morning about how many hours each of you plan to invest in the business in the forthcoming week and budget your hours just the same as you would for finances, it's a game changer. Katie played the devil's advocate. I don't think my dad would really be up to any type of meeting. He sees them as a waste of time. Does he watch football? She laughed. Of course, he's from Wisconsin. Well, in football, every team has a brief huddle before making a play. This doesn't mean that every play goes as planned. In a similar way, the best laid plans for your farm are never going to go as you draw them out. There are going to be days when you have breakdowns, bad weather, or other complications. But statistically, you score more touchdowns if you go into each play with a plan that everyone can work from instead of everyone doing their own thing. Katie agreed. I can only imagine if the Packers didn't ever huddle. Exactly, I said. The crowd would burn down the stadium in rage. The players all know how to play football, but if they don't know what their partners are thinking and planning to do, then winning would be nearly impossible. It's the same thing with coming up with a plan on Monday morning. It doesn't mean everything is going to go according to plan, But what it does mean is that at least you'll have a plan of attack and accomplish more together as a team, instead of everyone running every which way and fumbling the ball. Although Katie's dad, uncle, and brother were initially reluctant, they agreed to do a weekly meeting for a 12-week trial to see if it made a difference. And it did, to the point that they are still doing these meetings today.
Treat time like it's money.
Like I said to Katie, farmers need to budget their time the same as they budget their finances. You need to look at the use of your time and your employees' time the same as any cash investment. Every fiscal quarter, you probably sit down with a financial spreadsheet and ask yourself, how are we planning to invest our cash over the next 90 days to make the best use of our money? If you don't sit down to do a budget, then you'll spend your money frivolously doing whatever feels good in the moment. In the same way, you need to look at the investment of your time and that of your staff's time. You need to see how you are all about to spend the next week as an investment. Ask yourself, are we spending the right amount of time on the right things? Or are we not spending enough time doing critical things and instead getting caught up in the crisis of the day, which in 6 months won't matter? Instead of fighting fires, intentionally invest your time, prevent fires from ever happening. Just like it's critical to invest your financial resources, it is critical to invest your time resources to get the results you want. If you think money is finite, time is even more finite, and there are only so many things you can get done in a week. Are you placing your effort each week to do the right things, or just burning yourself out, running from one thing to the next? Just the same as you guard your wallet from a thief, you must protect the use of your time with equal, if not more, precaution. The key thing here is that you just don't look at your investment of time into the business, but also each of your partners' own investment of their time. In a family business, what you are doing is pooling your resources of time and money. You and your partners are collectively investing both your time and capital into growing the business. When your partner wastes an afternoon doing a task that isn't important, that is the same as him or her stealing money from the farm's bank account. Too often we are spending these resources, not investing them, because we aren't being wise or intentional about how we use our time. Thus, we get frustrated when we see money or time being wasted. You must look at time budgeting like you look at investing a limited amount of money on a pro forma spreadsheet. Time only goes so far. You can't just apply it aimlessly to your to-do list of never-ending tasks. Failing to plan how you invest your family's collective time or money is planning to fail. What I did for this family, which is what I do for most families I start working with, is help everyone to begin the routine of a family breakfast meeting on Monday mornings to plan out the week. Katie, her dad, her uncle, and her brother came to the table with a to-do list, not just for themselves, but the whole team. They went through the tasks together and numerically ranked the priorities of the task, as well as how long they'd take. Then, based on the weather forecast, they figured out what jobs were getting done on what days and by whom. For each day, they specified the priority task to get done, and then what other tasks could get done if there was extra time. Each night after chores, the family would have a huddle to confirm the plan for the next day. Sometimes plans had to be tweaked from what was agreed upon during the Monday meeting, but it was in this end-of-day huddle that each partner walked away with a solid to-do list for the next day and a commitment from each partner to getting it done by sunset the next night. It caused 3 paradigm shifts. First, they learned to respectfully disagree intentionally and prioritize together. Instead of having a never-ending list of tasks that needed to get done, they started to look at that list of tasks, asking what are the 20% of things on this list that we need to focus 80% of our efforts on doing and doing right. Instead of always being a day late and dollar short, they started to do less busy work and got critical tasks done in a timelier manner. Both Katie and her brother started thinking like owners instead of slaves, and Katie's brother really started to understand the value of his time. Instead of him showing up whenever and going home whenever he felt like it, he'd commit to how many hours he was planning to work that week, and then get specific with how many hours he was planning to work each day. And amazingly, he started to show up to work on time and stayed close to keeping those hours because he felt obligated to follow through on his word. Instead of doing the minimum, he focused on getting the most out of each day, and for the first time, Katie was excited to be in a partnership with her brother. The mindset of the business shifted from everyone thinking in terms of their little fiefdoms and their personal priorities to thinking like a team. By them coming to the table with a list of tasks in prioritized order for the whole team, it changed everything. They no longer thought in terms of, what do I have to do this week? Their farm's thought process became, what do we have to do this week for this business to succeed? They started to help each other out to get done what the big picture goals were for the business and the family that week. They were less concerned with their individual needs. For example, when their uncle's kid had a piano recital, Katie's brother offered to do his chores on Tuesday night so he could get away. They really started to think like a team. Katie's dad's mindset shifted from his kids working for him and being replaceable to them being business partners and invaluable.
Living intentionally.
Last week, I went to a busy restaurant and saw two families who each had two teenage kids sitting side by side in a booth. One family all had their phones out and had their eyes glued to their phones with very little social interaction among them. The other family all pulled out their cell phones and stacked them in the middle of the table. It was obvious they had a family rule that nobody touches their phone during a meal together, and they were being intentional with their time together. This family was talking and laughing with each other throughout the meal. Which family do you think got the full $100 value out of the experience of going out for a meal? Which family will likely still get together for Christmas in 10 years' time? Which family invested their time like it was money? With Katie's brother, I got him to write down the value of each hour each day, both in terms of the time he spent on the farm and with his wife and two kids. When he put his mind to it, Katie's brother was a skilled mechanic whose time would be billed out at $100 per hour if he worked for John Deere. There were some days where he was easily worth that, and other days during the winter months when he'd drag out finishing a job that a paid mechanic would do over just a few hours. Katie's brother always complained that he was stuck working weekends and was a slave to the business. My statement to him was, instead of your time being worth little more on a Tuesday afternoon than $10 an hour, make it worth $100 all the time by making each hour count. If you make each hour on the farm count during a weekday, then, when the snow is flying, your dad and uncle will have no problems with you taking Saturdays off. He accomplished this by starting to measure the value of what he accomplished each hour. Was he worth $10 or $100 an hour at 2 p.m. on Tuesday? At the time, he was having difficulty in his marriage, and I started to get him to measure the value of his time not only at work but at home. He and his wife canceled their Netflix subscription and have really worked hard to make each hour at home worth $100 an hour as well. By being purposeful in how he invested his time like money, both at work and home, his life has turned around. Prior to Monday morning meetings, each partner has to discuss with their spouse on the Sunday night before about the demands of the family. On Monday mornings, the partners discuss how they can support one another to be able to balance family obligations with work obligations. With Katie's family, the entire group must look at each partner's time, not only as an investment in the business, but also into each of their families. Everyone has to realize that for the business's long-term health, divorce is only going to be prevented by each partner investing their time not only into the business, but also into their families in a productive way. They hold each other accountable to being conscious of how they invest their time in the business and in their personal lives. Arnold Schwarzenegger said it best in a speech on YouTube called 6 Rules to Success. He said, "You've got to sleep 6 hours a day, and if you've got to sleep more than 6 hours, I suggest you figure out a way to sleep faster. That leaves you 18 hours in a day. You show me how you invest those 18 hours, I'll show you where you'll be in 18 years. If your family gets better at being more purposeful in the principle of investing your time like it's money as a team, you'll be able to not only have a successful business, but a happy family life as well."
To disagree or not to disagree.
You may wonder how disagreements can be any good at all, but when you learn how to have constructive disagreements in the right way, it can be a good thing. Learning how to have constructive disagreements or crucial conversations in a family business is super important. It helps family members work together better because they can discuss problems without fighting. This skill also helps them make good business decisions and keeps their relationships from getting messed up. So it's like a secret sauce for a successful family business that stays strong and happy. However, it is a skill set that doesn't come naturally. For over 20 years, a parent has had an "I'm smarter than you" attitude as they raise their children. Then they must transition from a parent-child relationship to a professional working relationship that allows for respectful differing of opinions between parent and adult child. This is about as unnatural of a transition process as you can think of. As one son said, "How can I speak up in a family meeting at the same kitchen table where, if I had a different worldview and spoke out of turn 20 years before, I would have gotten a wooden spoon smacked along the side of my head?" Over the last 15 years, I have come to learn that the key about learning the skill of having crucial conversations amongst family members is to have thoughtful discussions about small, unemotional things first. And that is just what treating time like it's money does. I'm not saying that at the start, these crucial conversations won't be tense, but over time, families learn to constructively disagree with each other in a respectful manner and to better problem solve together. One time, Katie's uncle laid out his plan for the week, and part of that was cutting the lawn on Tuesday afternoon. The uncle was in charge of the farm's bookkeeping, and he was habitually late in paying the bills to suppliers, which not only was embarrassing for Katie, but often cost the farm extra money in late fees. Katie respectfully mentioned that Thursday was the last day of the month. Perhaps Martin or Jose could cut the lawn instead, and you can pay the bills on Tuesday. If looks could kill, she would have been assassinated in that moment, but at the same time the uncle knew she was right, even though he would rather have a tooth pulled than pay bills. The uncle made a funny face as he put the task of pay the bills on the top of his list for Tuesday. Over time, what happened in these meetings were three subtle but substantial things. First, instead of doing whatever felt good, the family members started tackling the priority projects and doing what was right for the farm. Nobody was above the law. Next, it became okay to challenge the older generation's way of thinking. In fact, it was encouraged. You stop having to be perfect all the time in front of family members and your insecurities will dissipate. You get past that teenage-like confrontational mindset. What became important was that the right decisions were being made, not who was right. Finally, Dad and Uncle learned to respect Katie and her brother's opinion, if it made sense. When it didn't, both kids learned a valuable lesson as to why things are done the way they are. Dad began to view his kids as mature adults and as partners whose opinions he respected. Their relationships went from parent-child relationships where father knew best to a professional working partnership.
What comes after Monday morning meetings?
After 6 weeks of weekly Monday morning meetings, we started to also have a monthly family business meeting with Katie and her family where the partners brainstorm ways to improve the business. My rule of thumb is that the suggested changes during the first 6 months of using this process can't be more than 0.1% of what the farm's assets are worth. For this farm business, the farm's balance sheet said that it was worth just over $5 million, and thus we had a rule of thumb that no one could suggest an improvement that could cost more than $5,000. I didn't want the discussion to focus on spending $2 million building a new barn, which was a dream Katie had. I knew it had to start with a few low-cost changes first, while utilizing the buildings and machinery they already owned. My goal for these meetings was to focus on simple management changes that would quickly improve the efficiency of the day-to-day operations without laying out a lot of capital. As I explained to Katie in one of our first discussions, start with the small kindling, then add larger and larger logs as the fire can handle it.
From a parent-child to a professional working relationship.
During one of these monthly brainstorming meetings, Katie's brother suggested a very simple idea about improving farm efficiency that impacted both time wasted and money spent. He suggested that every day after work, and before partners go home, that they had to put any tools that were used that day in their proper place. He backed his idea by explaining how the farm had spent nearly $4,300 on various tools last year that were, for the most part, tools they had already owned but had misplaced. Someone had left that tool lying around, couldn't find it, and then decided to buy another because that was easier than looking for it. Katie's brother had OCD and was meticulous about putting away tools. However, his dad and uncle were perpetually bad at leaving tools around, and over the past few years there had been some arguments because of this. Katie's dad called me after that meeting feeling hurt and disrespected. He felt he was singled out in that situation, and his son had no appreciation for the hard work that had gone into building that farm. I knew exactly where Katie's dad was coming from, but I also knew that I had to help him see past his ego and understand what's best for the farm and partnership as a whole. I asked him the question, wouldn't it be better for you to make a few improvements to how you boys work together, rather than for your son to get frustrated working with you and get so angry one day that he wants to quit or even buy you out? It's not just him that has to make some changes, it is you as well. There was silence on the other end. I wasn't sure if I lost him or not. I continued cautiously and said, you know as well as I do that if everyone put tools away after they were done with them, the farm will be better off. Little pet peeves like you constantly leaving tools laying around will add up over the years to the point that your son gets sick and tired of working with you. Same as the pet peeve you had with your son a couple months back with constantly showing up to the barn late. I wouldn't have blamed you for firing him for that if he didn't put the work in to change his bad habit. But he did change, Tom said. I knew Tom was beginning to see more clearly. He did, I agreed. It might be hard to be called out by your son, even indirectly, but you guys must get rid of this father knows best mindset and transition from a parent-child to a professional working relationship. It's not just your son that has to act like a professional. Everyone involved in the business does, and that includes you and your brother. But let me assure you, these moments will eventually not come across as disrespectful anymore, because they are not about an individual but about improving the farm and partnership. But this can only happen if everyone is respectful and listening to everyone's perspective.
Transitioning management wisdom.
In another meeting, Katie brought an idea to the table about where they bought their crop inputs. Instead of using the local co-op, she found an online service where the farm could buy several different types of fertilizers and seed inputs that were 5 to 15% cheaper. Her uncle congratulated her for looking into it, but he also posed her a question. He asked her if when they had another agronomic problem in the field, would the company she suggested send someone out to help them figure out the problem and how to fix it? Katie was sure they did, but was unsure as to what to expect in response time for a service call. Well, they might send someone out, Uncle Bob continued, but it might be 6 weeks after you call them and not 6 hours. If we're in a tight spot, every day counts. Katie did not like having her ideas shot down. Katie, you are welcome to dig some more, but keep in mind that having good relationships with key people can either make or break you. Her uncle left it at that, and Katie understood. In that moment, Katie learned the importance of building long-term relationships with suppliers and how it was a value that had helped the farm succeed over the past 30 years. She learned a piece of valuable management wisdom, something that I believe is more important to transfer to the next generation before ever talking about asset transfer. One of my biggest pet peeves when working alongside some succession professionals is their obsession about the transfer of assets, instead of first focusing on the transition of management skills. They look at succession as a day-long event, not a decade-long process. With one of my first clients, I remember speaking to a very arrogant accountant who thought the simple solution to helping a 22-year-old son and his 57-year-old father to better work together was for the son to go to the bank and buy his father out. The accountant was obsessed with making things work on paper so that the bank would lend this broke 22-year-old $10 million. There was no discussion about whether the son had the management skills to be able to repay the loans. Where I'm from in Caygeon, the son who gets the farm inherits the family Bible and the family's fiddle. It takes at least 10,000 hours of me sitting beside my boy to teach him how to play the violin to the level that he could play in front of a crowd. It's one thing for my 5-year-old to see me play the fiddle, but it's a different thing for him to be able to pick up the violin and make sweet music out of it himself. Just in the same way it takes at least 10,000 hours for a son or daughter to be involved in joint decision-making and questioning why things are done the way they are done. They need 10,000 hours firsthand experience in decision-making, not just as a bystander, for them to have the confidence to manage under pressure. There are a lot of farming parents who think that their kids are learning how to make management decisions by observing how it's done. That's just like learning how to drive from watching in the back seat. This might sound like enough driving practice in theory, but it's just as effective as me thinking my kid is going to learn to play the fiddle by watching me play the fiddle, without ever picking it up himself. Professional sports teams emphasize the significance of nurturing self-confidence in players for success in intense games. Self-confidence plays a pivotal role in helping athletes perform under pressure, develop resilience, maintain mental toughness, take calculated risks, foster a positive mindset, and contribute to cohesive team dynamics. Similarly, parents grooming their children for management roles over several years must consider self-confidence equally crucial, as it allows next-generation owners to gradually develop decision-making skills, a sense of responsibility and accountability, the ability to learn from experiences, strong communication skills, and teamwork abilities. Nurturing self-confidence is preparing them effectively for future leadership positions. We have no idea when the Lord is going to take us from this world. I've seen a lot of 40-something-year-old farmers suddenly making real decisions for the first time 2 weeks after a funeral. They buckle under pressure when the first high-stakes decision comes up. To me, it makes sense to involve your successor in joint decision-making shortly after they graduate from college and return to the farm, rather than after a parent gets diagnosed with terminal cancer. Unlike milk cartons, we don't come with expiration dates, And I believe that the sooner you can start grooming your successor to have excellence in critical decision-making skills, the better. This is so that if a parent's lifespan is shorter than expected, your life legacy still lasts forever. Why? Because if your successor is involved in decision-making for the decade prior to Dad's passing, and not just a bystander, you can be more confident that decisions will be made a decade after Dad's funeral with the same wisdom and confidence that Dad or Grandpa exhibited.
Accountability.
It's not only important to learn to make decisions together as family members, but to follow up on these decisions as a team in subsequent meetings and hold partners accountable to following through on what they said they'd do. Business partners sometimes come up with reasons or excuses for not completing tasks, which can sound like, "I couldn't do it because of this or that." When these excuses pile up, it can slow down or even stop important decisions from happening in a business. This can be a problem because decisions often lead to actions that make the company money. So, when things don't get done, the business can lose out on opportunities to make more profit. It's like having a car but not putting gas in it. It won't go anywhere without fuel. A business won't grow without decisions turning into actions. Here's what I've learned about accountability in family businesses. First, accountability ensures that good ideas don't get lost or forgotten. What shocks me is that when I start working with even successful farm families, over a third of the decisions that get made never get implemented. Improving the rate of success in putting ideas into practice changes the return on investment listed on your business's annual year-end statement by several percentage points. With most businesses I work with, we nearly double their level of profitability within 2 years. I know this is a bold statement that is hard to believe, but that is a fact. Think about how even moving your return on assets by 1% would change your business's viability. Not until you get ideas into reality can you realize profitability. Until then, you will only experience frustration. Second, accountability fosters trust within the family team. There is no double standard between generations whereby father knows best and power struggles occur. I had a family patriarch who built a $50 million company from a 60-cow herd dairy think that he was above being held accountable to following through on what he said he'd do. For 3 consecutive meetings, he consistently didn't follow through on the simple task of ordering a garbage bin, and garbage continued to pile up across the farm. His kids continued to do whatever they wanted because Dad set the example, and they lost complete trust in whatever their dad was saying. It was only when the patriarch started to live by the phrase, "say what you'll do and do what you say," that everything fell into place. When you know that your family members are accountable, it strengthens the bond, mutual respect, and teamwork. Third, it helps in problem solving and adaptability. When you hold each other accountable, you become better at addressing challenges and adjusting your strategies as needed to stay successful. You learn to problem solve as a team until you get it right, getting better and better at the skill of team problem solving itself, so that no matter what happens in the future, there isn't a challenge your family can't solve together. You become bulletproof. Overall, learning to hold each other accountable in a family business team is like having a well-oiled machine where everyone plays their part in making sure the business not only survives, but thrives in the long run. It's key for lasting success and prosperity.
The larger logs.
As the fire can handle it, you add bigger and bigger logs. Within 6 months, Katie's family learned how to have more intelligent conversations without headbutting. About 9 months into the process, a neighboring farm that they rented came up for sale. 2 years before, they would have never considered bidding on it because Uncle Bob always thought farms were going for too much. But they were able to weigh the pros and cons of the decision at a whole different level. What they decided to do was to sever the house that was on the farm and sell gravel off the back end. Essentially, they were able to buy the farm for the same price as what they were already paying the neighbor for rent. They were able to have this conversation within 30 minutes, and everyone felt good about it. A year earlier, everyone would have been at odds with each other about what to do. Katie was floored because a year before there would have been no way that her uncle would have even considered discussing buying a farm, let alone signing a check. That is because over that year they had problem solved how they solved problems and dramatically evolved how they made decisions together. They started with time management and treating time like it's money, and then expanded into bigger decisions. You need to get your family stubborn at good habits such as listening or being empathetic. If you fix that, every decision is like clockwork. After 2 years, you can sit down to have an intelligent, strategic conversation like succession planning or business expansion without pride or egos getting in the way. Like I said, you have to fix the stubborn first.